Kevin Pelton joins us. He writes over at ESPN.com that Sam Hinkie leaves the Sixers better than he found them. Kevin, welcome aboard.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
You got it. I think for 3 years we've been talking a lot about the plan, the process, and the process walked out the door last night. Did Sam Hinkie have a legit reason to walk out the door?
Only he really knows that in terms of, what he understood in terms of what his role would be and, how comfortable he was with that. But, obviously things were going to be very different. We knew that they were going to be different from the moment that the Sixers hired Jerry Colangelo, and then with his son apparently coming in and, being a key part of that decision-making team, at least at Hinkie's level, if not above him, then, clearly, that's two now very strong voices within the organization coming from a different playbook, not necessarily a better or worse one, but a different one. So I think, I think once you knew that was happening, this became kind of inevitable.
You say that he left the team better than he found them. I think a lot of people look at a team that went from 19 wins to 10, and I think the people who judge the on-the-floor presentation scratch their heads. But a lot of times, Kevin, people fail to look at the job he did off the floor, and in that aspect, they're in a lot better spot, are they not?
Right, and I think people look so much at, where the team is now and not so much at the direction it's heading or where it could go in the future. And so when you looked at the team 3 years ago, and it's funny that Sam kind of mentioned something similar in his letter to the investors as far as, looking at the future power rankings and how low the Sixers rated 3 years ago because of the fact that they'd lost these two future first-round picks, and both of them lottery protected in trades because they traded away their last two first-round picks. They were depleted in terms of young talent, and especially young talent on their rookie contracts. So more than anything, what we've seen over the last 3 years is the Sixers not only maximize their own draft picks by putting bad teams on the court, but also adding extra draft picks from other teams so that, they're going to have, I think, potentially up to 8 guys on their rookie contracts on the roster next year if Dario Saric signs and they get the pick from the Lakers and keep all 4 of those rookies.
What kind of team, when Sam Hinkie got here, what was the outlook of this team? What did they have for the fans who don't like what's going on? Where was that team headed?
I think if you had tried to build around that core of guys of Drew Holiday and Thaddeus Young and Evan Turner, the upside has been kind of the Sixers' recent history, the kind of team that, might be able to sneak into the playoffs, but probably wasn't going to be very competitive there. So I think almost regardless of who had taken over, you were probably looking at some sort of rebuilding process rather than trying to keep doing the same kind of thing the Sixers had been doing, just maybe not as extreme as the one they pursued under Hinkie.
So they get into this process. Are there parts of this, Kevin, that you think a lot of people have said, I don't have a problem with the process, that it just wasn't executed well. Are there questions with the execution of some of the things that they've done?
For sure. I mean, I think, first off, if you would have told me in, 2013 when this first started, hey, in 3 years, the Sixers are going to be narrowly avoiding the worst record in NBA history, or for an 82-game season at least. You would have said, okay, something is not going right here. Something is not working as intended. This has taken longer than expected, and a lot of that is the fact that, the draft picks the Sixers own have not panned out in terms of, the transcendent talent that I think they were looking for. And, by Sam Hinkie's own, by his own words, the goal was to win a championship, and you don't yet have that championship foundation talent on the roster. So that's where I think the question can be asked. Questions can be asked about the execution, but that can look different in a hurry after this year's draft, after potentially making trades this summer, anything like that, or even just getting Joel Embiid back on the court.
Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com. Kevin, you mentioned that they're in a better spot than they were when he got here. Did ownership bail on Hinkie?
For sure. I mean, this is ultimately their call. They're the ones that, were willing to let him do this in a way that ownership in Houston, for example, didn't want to do. That's why the Rockets had a different strategy than when Hinkie was there, than he had when he was with the Sixers. And, they were the ones that ultimately pulled the plug and decided to change course on this. It wasn't anything of, internal to the front office. And, it's the outside pressures of other teams, possibly the national media. It doesn't seem like really Sixers fans, given that you're hearing for so many people are disappointed about this decision. But it was those outside forces, I think, impacting ownership that ultimately led to the change of course.
There's some reports that Brian Colangelo will take over, and I don't know if you feel that that's the best option, the first choice. I mean, but as you mentioned, the Sixers are in a better shape than when they found them. If they open this up and did a search for the right guy, is Brian Colangelo at the top of that list?
I don't think he's at the top of that list, probably, but he's in the conversation. I mean, I think people that are talking about this as strictly nepotism are ignoring the fact that this guy has won Executive of the Year twice, and he advocated something fairly similar to this with Toronto when he first arrived there, and they had a boatload of cap space. They had the number one overall pick in the 2006 draft. And obviously with hindsight, Andrea Bargnani, very disappointing as part of a weak draft class that year, but they also brought in, I don't think Calderon at that point, but Jorge Garbajosa, some international veterans, and built a team that overachieved the next year and was, I think had home court advantage in the Eastern Conference the following season. So this is, something he's done before. I just don't know if the way that things ended in Toronto, he was likely to necessarily get an opportunity somewhere else.
We're talking with Kevin Pelton, the ESPN.com, covering the NBA. Jerry Colangelo was brought in here. There's a piece that just came out about a half hour ago from Adrian Wojnarowski, who basically is writing that that Brian Colangelo didn't want this job and that the Sixers basically convinced him to take this job. I don't know how that's going to fly with the public here, but when Jerry Colangelo comes in here, does Jerry Colangelo now come in here? You go back to that day when that all happened. Did Jerry Colangelo come in here? Did your opinion change on why he's here and how he got here? I guess is really the question, because there's been so many theories on why he's even here in the first place.
I mean, this always seemed like the most logical outcome from the start was that Jerry.
By the way, we have you on from when you were on back in December saying this very thing, that Colangelo's son was going to be here, but he's saying, I didn't even want this job. I didn't want to work for my father again, according to this report.
Well, maybe that's why it took 5 months for it to, or 4 months or whatever it took for it to happen. But yeah, I mean, it always seemed logical that was going to be the outcome, that Colangelo wasn't, Jerry Colangelo wasn't just coming on as one voice in a diverse group of decision makers. No, he was going to, have the ultimate say. And then who would he rather have working with him? Who would he trust more than his son, who, when they were together in Phoenix, they did a terrific job of building that Suns team that was very competitive in the West with Steve Nash and Amare Stoudemire, guys that they brought in. I think, the interesting question that will be borne out by, their time in Philadelphia is, I think the league has advanced in part because of guys like Sam Hinkie in terms of front office work from where it was a decade ago. I think it was a lot easier to take advantage of the bad poker player at the table 10 years ago than it is now. So will that still work as well now is the question that I have.
Hinkie had done a pretty good job of taking advantage of the bad poker player, had he not? I mean, some of the deals that he has put them, and I think that's part of the problem with what Hinkie's done, Kevin, is that a lot of his deals didn't help them on the floor today, but it set them up for tomorrow, and that tomorrow is now.
Right, and that's the reason, I think one of the reasons that teams don't usually pursue this strategy is because the guy who does those moves doesn't always get to take advantage of them. We thought that it might be different in Philadelphia because of the fact that, there was a unique commitment to ownership to go through this kind of process at the start of it, but that changed. And, like other guys that have been in this position, you could even point to Brian Colangelo in Toronto, where he's the one who traded for Kyle Lowry. He's the one who drafted DeMar DeRozan, drafted Jonas Valanciunas. And now with some good moves around that by Masai Ujiri, that's the core of the team that Toronto has that's competing in the Eastern Conference.
And a similar situation that could happen here, Kevin, right? When Sam's well out the door, people could be talking about all the players that are here because of the deals that he made.
Right, because he's set them up with all these draft picks coming. I think that that Sacramento pick that is looking like it's going to be unprotected in 2019 could be a huge boon to this organization, but way down the road.
Yeah, and isn't that something that Sam kind of wrote in that letter? I don't know if you read the whole letter, but he basically maps out that when I got here, we were -2 in the picks. Now look where we are, and we'll have multiple picks. Even if the Laker pick doesn't happen this year, okay, now we have an extra pick next year. And then the 2 years, it seemed that he set them up constantly to be a player, even when they're good, to be in play to have multiple picks.
Right, and that's what's really powerful. You see that with a team like Toronto or Boston this year, where those are two teams that could have home court advantage in the East. And because of these trades they've made in the past with Brooklyn and New York, respectively, both of those teams are in line for lottery picks this year. So it gives them a chance to take that next step in the development, or continue adding to this core in a way that most contending teams don't. And that's a thing that's very possible for Philadelphia because of these future picks.
Will Hinkie get another job?
I'd be surprised if he did. I mean, I think that he's going to have to probably rebuild his reputation working as a number 2 guy in a front office again. Possibly back in Houston would be a reasonable outcome for this. But there's just such a toxic PR element to all of this that I think it's going to take another owner with strong conviction like Joshua Harris had at the beginning to make that kind of decision and bring him on despite the criticism he would face.
Or if the Sixers get good 2 years from now.
Yeah, that could rehabilitate his image in a way. So, we'll see. As Sam has learned and has told us, the future is hard to predict.
So the verdict, Kevin, did the process work? Kinda? Not really? Sort of?
I would say sort of. Again, the fact that we're here at this point where, the team is winning 10 games, it's hard to call it a complete success at this point. But it has set them up for future success in a way that, just kind of continuing the course that they were on 2-3 years ago, it would not have left them in the same position.
All right, Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com. Read his article in the Insider section. It's Sam Hinkie leaves the Sixers better than he found them. Thanks, Kevin.
All right. Always appreciate it.